Welcome to the Desert Blockchain Citizens Workshop on Saturday, August the 21st, 2021. It is 11 a.m. Arizona time. My name is Jay Carpenter, and I am the founder of Desert Blockchain and Desert Blockchain Camps. We are at one of the locations for Desert Blockchain Camps, the prototype location. We're in about a 26,000 square foot warehouse. And I'm delighted to talk to you today about building a Raspberry Pi from scratch. So we're basically going to cover three general areas. Number one is, why might you be interested in Raspberry Pis and Raspberry Pi small board computers? I'm going to approach that from, why am I interested in Raspberry Pi small board computers? And basically, bear with me just a moment. Start. So I'm going to, why spend your time on this? What is interesting about these small board computers called Raspberry Pis? Why might you be interested? Why am I interested? Number two is, then we'll go into, how could you actually build a Raspberry Pi from scratch? And I'll show you some resources. We're not actually going to build a Raspberry Pi from scratch per se, because that would take well over an hour. And instead, I'm going to show you some very valuable resources that I've found that help me guide through the process of building a Raspberry Pi from scratch. And then the third area is, we'll cover what's next. What could you expect to do with Raspberry Pis, both within the decentralized space as well as just in general? So that's basically the topic areas. So I'm going to basically stop my video for just a moment so you don't get dizzy. And I'm going to turn the camera. I'm turning the camera around and pointing at an actual Raspberry Pi that is running. And we'll take a look at, this is the screen, a monitor of a Raspberry Pi. And let me point it down there. There you can see the Raspberry Pi that's sitting underneath the monitor. And let's just take a look at, I built this yesterday from scratch. And let's just take a look at this upper left-hand corner and click on the Raspberry Pi. And here you can see, let me move it up just a little bit so you can see this. You can see some of the things that are available to you software-wise right out of the box by just installing the bare bones basic Raspberry Pi. In terms of programming, you have all these different IDEs, Mathematica and Node-RED, which we'll be talking about towards the end. Scratch, which is a great way to learn how to program a computer. This is actually a project from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. You have emulators, games, all sorts of things. Wolfram Alpha, which is a great database for all sorts of intelligence and so forth. In terms of education, you have SmartSim, which I'm not really familiar with. You have a complete Office suite. So this is something akin to Microsoft Office, only it's open source, has some very attractive features to it that enhance your privacy and security. You have internet functionality. We're using a Chromium web browser. You have email clients, sound and video. You have a media player, graphics, all sorts of things. Games, plenty of games. Minecraft, you can play on this. And then accessories, all sorts of things you can do. And I'm going to point out something that I'm not sure a lot of people that use Raspberry Pis are familiar with, but there's an SD copier, and we'll talk about what an SD is in a bit. But this is a very handy way to sort of back up your Raspberry Pi and all the things that you can do on it. You have help resources, reference libraries, and so forth. You can set all sorts of preferences. So this is a very powerful, actually desktop PC, and the Model 4, which we're showing you right now, was introduced in about, I think, 2019. So it's been out for a couple of years. There's a huge community. But again, to talk about why am I interested in this, let me screen share and show you some things that might be of interest to you. Sorry about this. I'm having difficulty finding the controls for Zoom. Aha, that's the reason. So let me do the screen share. Show you a few more things that are at least interesting to me. Number one is you can use the Raspberry Pi as an entertainment center. So here is a Google search of Raspberry Pi Entertainment Center. You can actually turn these into pretty powerful entertainment centers where you can watch movies. You can use this as your Spotify player. You can actually create something akin to an Alexa or a Google Home, all sorts of powerful applications here. You can also, you can do all sorts of things. I'm not going to go into all of these today, but if you just simply Google, and what I've done is clicked here, Raspberry Pi, here's top 20 Raspberry Pi projects that you can try and create all sorts of interesting applications and use cases in terms of lighting, security cameras, entertainment systems, home automation, a whole incredible array of use cases. You're really only limited by your imagination. And here you can see computers, gadgets, robots, all sorts of handheld gaming consoles, all sorts of things. So that's just a little bit of a taste as to why you might be interested in this thing called a Raspberry Pi. And you can go to raspberrypi.org here, and you can start to see some of the educational resources that are associated with a Raspberry Pi, and how you can learn. You can learn computer skills, you can learn Internet of Things, all sorts of different realms are available to you if you're interested in continuing to pursue the Raspberry Pi. So, whoops, let me stop the screen share for just a moment and talk about some of my interest in the Raspberry Pi. So these small board computers basically started out as a way for youth to learn about computer programming. And they've been out for, I'm guessing, probably close to 10 years now. And basically what has happened is that the form of the device, the inexpensive nature of it, and the versatility of it has blossomed into this incredible platform of uses. That's why I'm interested in it. And I have spent a lot of time focusing on how to program a Raspberry Pi, how to use it, how to implement it. We're using it here in the Desert Blockchain camp. I'm going to show you in a minute the target game that Shane Sandler has created, and our workshops that we've been doing in the past have been conducted by Shane, and he has shown folks how to use the Raspberry Pi as a way to build an incredible mixed reality game. So I'll show you that to you in a moment, but suffice it to say, this is a platform that, in my view, has been well worth my time to learn, and I would highly recommend it to anybody watching this video to spend some time, play with a Raspberry Pi, see what you can do with it, investigate what the use cases are, and basically see if it's something of interest to you. It does take something to learn how to use one of these, and we're going to transition into the how to set up a Raspberry Pi from scratch in a moment. But in my view, this is a very powerful way to introduce yourself to computing, to networking, to mesh networking, to Internet of Things, all sorts of incredible use cases. So I will leave it at that for the moment. And by the way, if you're watching this on the YouTube live stream, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I am keeping an eye on that. So let me stop my video for just a moment, and now we're going to transition into the how to set up a Raspberry Pi from scratch. And go back to this shot. So this, again, is a view of an actual Raspberry Pi that was set up from scratch yesterday. And instead of me going through that whole process, I'm going to go back to my screen share, and I'm going to give you the video that I use to guide me through setting up a Raspberry Pi each and every time. And this was produced in 2019, July 5th, 2019. It's about 12 minutes. It's by someone that goes under the brand of ETA Prime. And I recommend this video. There might be others out there that are you might like better, but there's a whole bunch of videos on how to take a Raspberry Pi and from scratch and build it, how to load the software, how to set it up, how to do everything you need to get this thing running. So this is what I would recommend you take a look at and basically start from scratch. Now, where do you get some of these? Where do you get one of these Raspberry Pis? This is my second recommendation, and I do not make any money from any of these recommendations. Desert Blockchain is completely community funded through our citizen program. But this, when I buy a new set of a new Raspberry Pi, I usually buy the Cana kit. And this is, I would say, probably the path of choice to get started with a Raspberry Pi, because they actually provide an SD card, which is this red thing over here that says Samsung 32. That's a 32-bit or 32 gigabyte SD card. They actually provide that's preloaded, ready to go. You just simply plug it in and you can fire up your Raspberry Pi, I believe. I don't do that, but I believe they have a fully loaded SD card. You just simply plug it in. But this is how I would recommend you get started with the Raspberry Pi for this complete kit. So that's my suggestion to start from scratch. Watch this YouTube video from 2019, 12 minutes, and then that's after you have bought a Raspberry Pi kit, which you can get through Amazon, you can get through a number of places. And I'm going to mention a couple others. Adafruit is one of the premier vendors, online vendors of both Raspberry Pis as well as other really cool Internet of Things and devices, and you can build robots. They have a great repository of videos showing you how to do different things, including object recognition, artificial intelligence on the Raspberry Pi, all sorts of really awesome resources. The other is SparkFun, which also has great videos and a great selection of different components and different things that you can do with a Raspberry Pi, as well as other sort of do-it-yourself electronics. So let me stop the screen share. And this is a little bit of an experiment, but this is a Raspberry Pi that I have put into a case, and this is a Raspberry Pi 4, and you can see the fan right there in the middle. I highly recommend you get a fan for your Raspberry Pi 4. They ran rather hot, and this is what it looks like inside of a case. And actually you can see down here is another Raspberry Pi, which is running on this monitor, and that I showed you a moment or two ago. But basically this case, along with one of these SD cards, and this is actually a 64 gigabit SD card. And if you put that SD card right here in the back, and this is one of those kind of tricky things that they don't really tell you about usually, but you got to put the contacts for the SD card, those gold contacts, you got to put those up, and you got to just sort of slide that into the back of the Raspberry Pi, just like that. Hopefully you can see it. And that's the way you get your Raspberry Pi started. You plug in the power supply, which is like right over here. These are the micro HDMI connectors, and then this is a jack for an external speaker and so forth. These are the USB slots, and also your Ethernet slot. But basically that's it. You also have these pins where you can control all these pins down here, GPIO pins where you can control all sorts of devices. And that's basically your quick intro into a Raspberry Pi, what it looks like, how it works, and so forth, as well as a resource to help you get started with a Raspberry Pi. So that is kind of a quick and dirty how-to, and back to the actual running Raspberry Pi. This is again the monitor and an actual running Raspberry Pi that was created from scratch yesterday after going to Walmart and buying one of these SD cards, a 64 gig, for about 14 bucks. And I got that at Walmart. So I know that's kind of a lot in a fairly short period of time, and we're not done just yet, but let me stop that. So one thing that has been my experience regarding the Raspberry Pi is this is kind of a learning project. And I would recommend that you take it on as a learning project and you will learn a ton. But a learning project is different than a plug and play electronic device that you get at a Best Buy. And in fact, you can buy Raspberry Pis now at Best Buy and Target, and they're becoming much more mainstream. But basically that little bit that I showed you, just simply putting the SD card into the Raspberry Pi, that can stop a lot of people because people sometimes put it in upside down and basically it doesn't work. So even in that ETA Prime video that I showed you, there's a lot of little gotchas that if you don't know exactly how to do something, and if you get stuck, frustrated, stop because something doesn't work, because there can be just one little thing that's wrong, either in loading the software or pulling up something called a command line, any of that stuff, it becomes it can become a showstopper. I know a lot of people that have bought Raspberry Pis and they were interested in them. They took them home, tried to fire them up. Something happened. It didn't work, and basically just sat on a shelf collecting dust. So the next part of the session, number 3, is basically we've talked a little bit about why you might be interested in a Raspberry Pi, why I'm interested in Raspberry Pis. We've talked about, we've done a very high level survey of how to build a Raspberry Pi from scratch, and I've given you some resources to do that. Now, the third thing is, okay, what's next? If you put a little time and a little effort into Raspberry Pis and these small board computers, what could you do? Where could you go? What are the resources? And that's where we're going to transition into here at Desert Blockchain Camp, and basically what might be available to you if you take a look at this realm. And let me again switch over, turn the camera around. Bear with me just a moment. Running Raspberry Pi. Okay. So this is a view of the Crypto Cannoneer target range that we have here at Desert Blockchain Camp. This is actually a live range that can be operated either physically while you're here, or you can get on Telegram and operate this in a remote control way or via Telegram from anywhere in the world. And we've had, I believe, 4 workshops with Shane Sandler showing how, demonstrating this this target range. He has shown you Node-RED, and Node-RED's available again on the Raspberry Pi. This entire range is run using Raspberry Pis, and it's actually using a version of the Raspberry Pi that's even less expensive than the one I was showing you, the Raspberry Pi 4. This is primarily being run on Raspberry Pi Zeros. But the point of this is that we will be having these workshops on Saturdays from 11 a.m. to noon. It's for Desert Blockchain citizens, but we will open it up from time to time to Desert Blockchain members and the public. But the best way for you to actually get your hands on a Raspberry Pi and avoid or at least minimize the frustration of using these devices is to actually come here to Desert Blockchain Camp and participate in these workshops where we will help you get set up on the Raspberry Pi. So let me again turn this around. So for instance, you know, the frustration that I mentioned where if you don't have the SD card in, you know, right side up or the way it can make contact, nothing's going to work. If you run into a particular operating system issue, it's not going to work. And, you know, there are other places here in Arizona that can also help you with Raspberry Pis. Heatsink Labs in Mesa has awesome resources for small board computers, do-it-yourself projects, maker projects. There is Phoenix Forge, which is downtown. It's a new facility in downtown Phoenix, and I'm not sure what their small board computer offerings are at this point, but suffice it to say, they have a great maker space there. So whether it's Desert Blockchain Camp, whether it's, you know, citizen workshops, whether it's Heatsink, Phoenix Forge, there's probably other resources that I'm not aware of. I highly, highly recommend that you start investigating Raspberry Pis and what capabilities are available for you. And in particular, I highly recommend that you consider creating some projects with the youth in your life, your sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters, nieces, nephews. If you mentor youth, you know, through various programs, I highly recommend that you at least give them the opportunity to investigate what's available in terms of a learning and fun and utility experience with these small board computers and so forth. So I'm going to leave it at that for today. That's about a 30-minute session. Usually we have hour-long sessions, but sometimes they don't always go that long. I don't see any questions in the chat, and there are a couple people watching on the YouTube live stream. So I hope this has been interesting to you. I hope it has brought up a few valuable areas that you could explore with some of these small board computers. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate your time and attention. And if you're interested in attending one of these workshops, please let me know, Jay Carpenter, and you can go to desertblockchain.com and find my contact information. But this is really the start of the ability to build community, create connections, learn in a collaborative workspace environment, and not only learn about IoT and all that sort of thing, but also learn about decentralization, because there's some really powerful software and networking constructs that you can create using a network of Raspberry Pis and other computing resources. So that's about it for today. And I invite you to tune in next Saturday from 11 to 10. And we publish the live stream, and you know, it's free to attend the live stream. So let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for your time and attention. And this is available for review. It does take about a day in order to edit down the lengthy, like an hour and a half lead time that's necessary, but that'll be edited out. And if you have any questions, comments, please let me know. Thanks for your time and attention, and we look forward to you participating in the future. Have a great day.